A very good morning all, and welcome to this Amodal webinar from Complexity to Clarity, Rethinking Deliverables Management in Major Projects. Delighted for you all to join us this morning. We've got quite an interesting but packed agenda for today to get through. Andrea, please introduce yourself.
Good morning, everybody. So my name is Andrea Scrutton. I am CDE Systems Manager for Bathby Da Vinci, and my responsibility is basically keeping the lights on. So I provide access to all systems, we look at the integration, we support systems. So I'm part of the information management function, and for me, it's about data. So have we got the right data in the right place? Has everybody got the right access to the right data? Have we integrated the systems together so that we can map data together? So, that's, focus on data. Do you want us to do the next question, Stuart?
Not yet, Andrea, no. We'll hand over to George, but thank you, Andrea, and welcome. George.
Morning, everybody. My name is George Christoforou. I'm also from Bathby Da Vinci. I am the Head of Information Management. My responsibility is looking after all our information management disciplines, for instance, the GIS, the BIM, whatever. We like to focus on BIM, structured data, the data analysis that we have, anything that's related to information management and tracking it, running it from place to place, and concentrating on hopefully what we're going to focus on, structured data. Thank you.
Thank you very much, George. Thomas Flannery.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Thomas Flannery. I'm the Head of Digital Information Management at McLaren Construction Group. So we're a national principal contractor in the UK, work across most of the UK and have a presence there. So in my role, I'm responsible for our group standard to support the deployment and application of our information management and digital construction technology portfolio.
Thank you, Thomas. And my colleague, Tom Whiting.
Yeah, so Tom Whiting, Managing Director of Amodal, working across a variety of asset owners and contractors, helping form their information management standards through to kind of how you implement those and helping them roll them out across organizations to deliver some benefits against usually their pain points that they're facing before us coming in.
Thank you, Tom. And it is Thomas for Thomas Flannery and Tom Whiting and Tom for Tom Whiting. My name is Stuart Bell. I'm CEO of Amodal, and it's my pleasure this morning to really act as facilitator, although I know having met Andrea, George, Thomas and Tom, there is plenty to discuss, so I know we'll have good momentum. Just for those of you that don't know Amodal, we're specialists in information management in the built environment. We work right across the full asset life cycle with major asset owners, property developers and contractors, and we're all about providing trusted information that supports better outcomes, specifically on projects. So we augment or embed as part of delivery teams quite often if we're on the contractor side, or we embed ourselves as part of the client side team to support progressive assurance and make sure information is useful for stakeholders at point of need. And that's something that I'm sure we will get into momentarily. Tom, in terms of a scene setter, if I can pass over to you.
Thank you, Stuart. Yeah, I kind of just wanted to, there we go. Just wanted to kind of start by thinking about what is that single source. Obviously, everyone says about the golden thread, and there's definitely a perception that there is only one source of where all information is going to exist. And I know I've had plenty of conversations with the other panel members about where there is that single source, where is the information growing. I think the larger the project, the more challenging and complex this becomes, more and more, especially to do with the Building Safety Act. Clients will have their own system or systems in place. Traditionally, I think going back to 1192 suite, you'd have the contractors kind of led the way with their CDEs, and that's definitely starting to shift. So these mega projects that are kind of with BBV and some of the others as well with McLaren definitely have the designers have got their own systems as well. So it's definitely becoming more complex and more challenging. There is, even though we're going to talk a fair bit about data, I'm sure there's still an underlying document world that we live in. The documents are the deliverables that need to kind of be done, but we're using data to understand where those documents are through multiple systems and how they kind of evolve on different projects through different perceptions. Stuart, if you go to my next slide. So this is kind of my crude analogy that we've kind of got lots of people kind of, if we want to use the kind of ISO terms, producing TIDPs, or effectively the subcontractors are telling you what they're actually going to produce across a whole variety. If there was only 3 organizations doing this, it would be a lot simpler. But as we kind of pull all that information together as either an asset owner or a contractor, depending on how you're set up, you're then starting to pull out different strands of information for different use cases, whether it's the client deliverables, Building Safety Act, your handover deliverables, they're all different subsets of that information that you would effectively, you've got what's going to be planned, is it actual, and then understanding change as you're going through this process. You can start looking into more and more detail about how people are performing. Are they late of what they've said? What impact is that having? Which is kind of looping into that risk. And everything has to be kind of mapped on the back end into the relevant packages, which is that kind of complicated bit of how do you allocate one person's document to 15 packages, understand that change and the kind of contractual connections associated with that as it evolves through projects. So even though it kind of sounds like the initial question, the ask tends to be, what are you going to give me? When are you going to give it me? The kind of repercussions of that, bringing it all together when you're dealing with, most likely on all these projects that we'll probably discuss, is over the 100,000 documents, it gets quite complicated, as well as all the other different bits and pieces. It's a very simplistic view. If you go to the next slide, Stuart. So the only way that can kind of look simple is really by standardizing it as much as possible. There's this kind of recent study that's, I think it was on phase 3, Stuart updated me earlier, that's now got to there, but that kind of data analysis can drive, or consistent inputs effectively and consistent outputs, you can get these productivity gains. And we all know construction is working at kind of very low margins, and we kind of are looking for those productivity gains to kind of increase margins and decrease costs as a result of that. But we really need to kind of stop thinking in isolation, and there is always a danger of data for data's sake. We've got photogrammetry and all these other bits and pieces. We can gather data. Should we gather data? What value is that data gathering? And can we standardize the gathering and the utilization of that to unlock some productivity gains? Because we shouldn't be varying these things. If we can standardize it, we can improve it and understand it through kind of performance analysis. So yeah, that was kind of my little intro, Stuart.
Tom, thank you very much indeed. So we'll move now into the panel discussion. Hopefully that very short scene setter there has put you in the frame of mind about where we're focusing today. So I'll now introduce the panel. Andrew, we'll start. In fact, I'll start with the same question for everyone. But what does deliverables management mean to you?
So I mean, we want to be really simple about it. It's the management of all our project data, isn't it? Getting more complex, it really is about how are we going to deliver to our clients, but also it encompasses archiving, it encompasses all kinds of things. Our liaison with supply chain, it's up and down the whole chain. So I think it's such a wide question. I'm interested to hear what everybody else is going to say on this as well.
George, I'll pass over to you. What does deliverables management mean to you?
I would go, it's delivering it used to be our documents to our client, but it's delivering our digital information these days, our digital information to our clients. So whatever we used to produce as documents, as check sheets, as whatever we used to do, we do the same still because we do them electronically, but it's the end deliverables that we then hand over to our client with the assurance to it, with the data, the graphical data that we hand over, where they can take on and operate or use or fix or use a manual against it from what we've created at design and construction stage.
Thank you, George. And Thomas.
Oh, yeah, I think I sort of agree with Andrew. It's quite a broad term, but from my perspective, I would tackle that in 2 parts. So one, do you understand what the deliverables actually are? So what is the customer asking of you? So what do we need to produce at handover? I liked Tom's slide that he had on a minute ago, where he showed the information delivery planning going through to handover, and you had the various sort of branches coming off because they are what are the use cases for the deliverables that you need to understand? Do you have a good understanding of those at the outset of the project? And then the management part is basically, have you got the people, the process, the technology in place to support the deliverable of those use cases that you've identified?
Thank you, Thomas. Tom, does that vary at all from an asset owner perspective, putting your master plan hat on?
Yeah, the only bit I think that was missed was about how is it going to be received and how are you going to deliver that and managing through that process. So I think there's obviously a focus, if you want, of the input of what you're going to receive from a contractor perspective, how you're going to manage that through your processes and various systems, because as we've alluded to, it's not just documents, there's data and kind of all the validation that sits there. It'll be in multiple systems, but how does that fundamentally be packaged up? A common one I'll see is like snags. You'll have a snagging tool, but is your deliverable a PDF at the end of it with a list of snags? Is that adding any value at the end would be the question, which I think is an important one, because actually clients more and more need to probably specify they want databases for certain bits and pieces. They don't want dumb documents.
And I'll just hone in on that one. Thomas, I'll come back to you. Client requirements and how you receive those. Specification at the right level of detail? Do you tend to find they're slightly enriched? What's your view on the state of information requirements that come to you today?
Depends who authored them, to be quite honest with you. A lot of the bigger clients that we work with will have internal teams with a good understanding of the level of maturity they want at handover, and they understand their use case for when we hand over the asset. So those conversations tend to be a lot smoother because there's probably a lesser degree of inflexibility. For clients who are looking to aspire to get to that level and are relying perhaps on external consultants because they don't have the internal capability, sometimes maybe that's been over-egged a little bit, what they're being sold. So they're asking perhaps for the kitchen sink when they don't necessarily need that. So those conversations tend to be a bit more challenging because the consultant who's advising them doesn't necessarily want to retreat from the position that they've sold the client, but customers need to be open to, listening to what we try to say. We're a contractor. We've delivered multiple projects like of this scale before. We are trying to help you and give you better value for money and trying to give you what you would actually need at the end.
And Andrea, perhaps I'll pass to you with your clients on your major programs you deliver. Is there any wiggle room, any greyness in terms of deliver, or is it very explicit? Is it quite prescriptive in terms of what you need to deliver and when?
I think sometimes it's a bit of both. So I think there's certain aspects where they know what they want and they're pretty set in stone on that. And yes, we can have conversations around it. But then there's other areas where maybe they hadn't considered it, they hadn't thought that through. Oh, it's a bit for later stage, so we'll get to that later. And then sort of later doesn't come very often, does it? We put things off. So I think with projects I'm working on at the moment, we've experienced both of those things. I think, our ideal is that we get to a point where we've got mature clients, they know what they want. Not only do they know what they want, but going back to Tom's point, they know how they want to receive it, because that is a massive challenge. But I think quite a large range of clients are just not there. They want to be, but they're not. I think there's definitely some help in the industry that could be given to help everybody get to that maturity stage.
Thank you, Andrew. And George, if I can pass over to you as well. A lot of the projects you work on are actually part of programs which can transcend many years. Obviously, in the background, information management and standards change over that time. How do you respond when perhaps you're under contract for standards that were developed in yesteryear, whereas cutting edge or leading ISO 19650 standards may prevail today?
Yeah, so you're right with that, because we do have that quite regularly, because where we started off with one way of working, one delivery, because many people have said that, yes, we know what we're delivering, we know when we're delivering it, but sometimes technology moves on, standards move on. So how do we adapt and how do we deliver with that? Now, if we were on a smaller project, perhaps it wouldn't matter because that change wouldn't impact us. But on the larger project, it does impact us. So we've got to make sure that we are ahead of the game. And when I say ahead of the game, making sure that we have taken consideration of that and starting to put some of these changes in process, because we always have to look at, when we start a project, we always look at what's the end game, what are we going to deliver, how are we going to deliver it, and so on. Thomas has mentioned that already, but how do we develop as we've gone through and this technology has moved on? We started on this project with spreadsheets. All right, we're finishing with databases. That's a development option that we had to go through from the size of the project that it was when it started to where we are now.
Brilliant, thank you, George. Thomas, is that the same for yourselves? Thinking about McLaren, the nature of projects that you do? Do you sometimes find that your appointment documents that may have been set a couple of years ago will say one thing, but current standards and the maturity of the client ask is somewhere else, and you want to make sure that you're putting your best foot forward for future work as well with that client?
You've got to exercise a degree of agility or flexibility dealing with the customer. I think knowing what project George and Andrea are working on, the scale that is typically associated with whether it be in a typical building, whether it be a building new build, or what we're doing a lot of now in central London, which is cutting carves where we're retaining the existing structure and building a couple of additional floors. You're looking at programs of maybe 2 to 3 years. So you're not going to necessarily see any seismic shifts from where the current position is at the outset of the project to where you are at the end. However, client, I think it goes back to the point that I've sort of alluded to in my previous answer about the customer not necessarily understanding what they're going to do with the asset in the in-use and not actually having defined it. Maybe it's because we seem to have moved away from asking plain language questions at the outset, certainly at the front, and when they're defining the brief, they'll start making decisions and making those decisions when the asset's actually being built. So we need to we try. We try and get, we're most on any single project where it's a 2-stage, and we're certainly in that sort of pre-construction services agreement, we are trying to sort of nudge the client as much as possible and get as much out of them and try and set a bit of a scene for them and say, okay, you're not making a decision, but if we move away from what's defined in these information requirements, you want to add more data on top of it, for example, into the model, or your use case actually changes, you're going to have to be aware of the implications to sort of remedy that when we get towards handover.
Brilliant, thank you. In prepping for today's questions, I was themed slightly by the report that Tom mentioned. So in 2020, the Construction Productivity Task Force was put together, and there were a number of contractor, client and consultant representatives sit as part of that task force. Productivity gains often hinge on how well information flows across a project, the report says. So let's start there. Where do you see the biggest gaps between the information that teams need and what they actually get on live projects? Tom Whiting, I'll start with you on that.
Sorry, clarify what you mean by teams need.
So to take decisions in the project, across the project life cycle, to support at whatever life cycle stage they're at.
So I think the important bit is to have the appreciation that you're kind of using ISO terms. Things vary throughout a project, but if I use ISO terms, you've kind of got your WIP. So a lot of field tools, I might argue, are WIP, because you're gathering, they're an input data, an efficient way of gathering data, snags and things like that. It's how do you package that up for those kind of deliverables? What are you doing with that information? RFIs, are you closing them out? There might be in a CDE. Things are happening in lots of different systems and lots of different ways. But I think the productivity gains is having the right systems for the right tool and being really the right systems for the right use case, and making sure that people are educated on what you use, where you use it, and doing it in the right way. I think people can become confused trying to force a system to do one thing when it's not designed to do that thing. You're not going to get any gains on that. Now, there is a return on investment kind of conversation to have, but the business needs to understand that that might need an overhead, but you don't buy another system associated with that, so the balance might be there. So yeah, when you're looking at productivity, you should always map out the process first of all, understand, and then start overlaying your kind of tech and thinking about your people and working through how those can be improved and what you'd replace if required.
Thank you, Tom. Andrew, I'll come to you then. In terms of the biggest gap, that's what we were focusing on. So there's an expectation. You probably have people knocking on your door fairly regularly around the stakeholders on the projects and programs that you sit on. What would those gaps be?
I mean, for me, the biggest gap at the moment is the EIR coming in from the client. I think around that maturity, again, what do they know what they want? Do they know how they want to receive it? Have they thought this through? Have they thought about the sharing of data and formats and things like that? Another big gap for me is technology. We will never have one system that does everything, and I don't think we want one system that does everything. But I think we've still got a long way to go with a lot of the systems that we've got. They're out there on the market, and I think it's about us trying to help shape those products and into what we need, and some of these vendors really starting to listen to us. And then the other thing I've written down is I think we've got knowledge gaps. Information management still isn't recognised enough. That also means that then we haven't got that influx of people coming through. At some point we're going to really start losing a lot of experience there. So one big gap there is actually staffing.
Brilliant, thank you, Andrew. George, is there any different perspective for yourself? So you mentioned quite a number of different information sources and types that ultimately you're responsible for. So GIS, for instance, that could be a different stakeholder group. Any other gaps that are prevalent in your mind?
Well, just one thing, maybe it's taking it slightly off, but just want to keep it about information and collecting and so on. We as a project, we as an industry collect so much data. Sometimes we're not clear on what that data is and why we need it. So maybe we need clarity right at the beginning and be clear on our requirements when we want to report out on it as well. So therefore we'll be smarter in what we collect, how we collect it, and make sure that the systems work more efficiently by us collecting the right data. And there is a fact. Now, what that fact is, I don't know percentage wise, but I know many years ago when I was looking into it, it was something like we were collecting as an industry, the data, but we were only using around 20% of that data to make useful decisions to make it. Might be interested to go and look it up now and see what that is now, because we've got, technology's moved on from quite a few years ago.
It's less than that, George. I think.
Is it really?
It'll be far less. There's the interest. I think of it a bit like a battery. Everyone knows how their phone charges. The last 20% is really slow and really difficult, and in reality, really expensive to get. But what's the value? There's so many easy wins. There's some data that will be naturally just collected as part of the process. So if I asked how much steel work have you got on a project, you will know because all the steel will be modelled. But actually you go, that's not really all the steel because you've not modelled all the details. And do I have to model every single bolt? And modeling that will cost a lot of money, but you could just go, well, I'll apply a factor, which is what QSs will do anyway. They'll just apply all of those bits and pieces. So it's all back to what's the return, what's the end use case, and also having a difference. I know things have changed a bit with the EIRs, but a client requirements and a contractor requirements, that a contractor might gather data for the contractor's benefit, not the client's benefit as well. So it might not get used at the end. So it's even the contractor understanding the value. Do they want more because they're going to get benefits from it?
Yeah, and Thomas, anything else to add on that?
Just going back to your question about information, what the gaps, or we're referring to the data point about how we're consuming data, because I think the process and the technology is quite easily solved. You can solve that, and then once you understand the technology you're using and you're following a procedure, you are then should be able to collect structured data quite easily. But the challenge is, and I think I'd say the information gap or the gaps, I'd say it's cultural, and it's a willingness of people working on projects, whether that be internally within our own organization or the supply chain, and getting them to maybe change from a way of working that was perhaps what they were used to 20 years ago to a more digitally enabled way of working and consuming that data. Because I was at a very good. I was at a round table with Microsoft a few weeks ago, and their chief data officer, I thought it was a really good point. He said, "Data's all well and good, but it's worthless unless it's actually being used to inform any sort of type of decision that you are making at project level."
Do you think, I'm going to ask questions right now here, because it was kind of you, Thomas and George have alluded to it. Do you think, I'm going to call them data inputters, whoever's gathering the data, all those different stakeholders, understand the value of that data and why they're being asked to do it? Because they might have used to do one process and now they've been asked to do another process, and they all see it as cumbersome and I never used to have to do this, can't be bothered, so they don't do it and don't value it. Do you think there's an education piece in there for those stakeholders to kind of understand the value that's being generated off of them doing those bits and pieces? They won't always see the benefits fundamentally.
Yeah, you've got to understand. It's the I learned this from James, Tom, who we both know. But James, when we were sort of going on this digital transformation strategy at McLaren, he said to me, when you're trying to sell something to an end user, you've got to explain the why and the emotive benefit for them and how it's going to benefit them in their role day to day. So that is a real focus when anytime we're deploying any technology in McLaren. We'll try, we identify the users, the use cases, and try and explain to them why they need to be doing it. On the flip side, we've got our own internal justification and reasoning for actually wanting them to use the technology, because we're looking for structured data that we can then report against and make informed decision making across the group against our project portfolio. It depends, I'd say, like going back to the different use cases or different users who are generating that data, because I did something to a models one, I did data to a models one example, and that can be quite onerous. But things like using a bit of technology on site, like field management, where you are digitize what would have been previously paper-based forms, that's just a change in the day-to-day activities, but that is structured data that you are then generating.
Sorry, Tom, I didn't know whether you were coming in with a follow-up question.
No, I was going to see if George and Andrew were going to add to it. Sorry.
No, that's fine. But I do some work with NEMA, so formerly the UK BIM Alliance. And Andrew, you make a really, really good point about is information management understood? Is there a home for information managers? And that could be everything from BIM and digital engineering leads through to document controllers, which in my mind, if you took Excel and document controllers out of our industry, it would collapse. So kudos to anyone who's developed a career through document control, keeping these processes together. But we've got ISO 19650 and frameworks like that should give us consistency, but adoption is still patchy. What's stopping us from making standardized ways of working business as usual? So we've touched on a cultural and skills gap there. Is there anything else? Andrea, George, I don't know if one of you take the lead on that.
Yeah, I can. I say ISO 9650, I think, is still quite subjective, because there are certain things in there that you can look at, and there could be 5 or 6 of us here, it could be all 20 odd of us around here could read it and just have a slight nuance on the way we do things. Doesn't mean it's wrong, it just means that we have a slight nuance on how we do it, how we collect our items, how we structure our systems, and so on. So by allowing or by doing that and putting that into place, that could give us a problem by how we label things, what we call things, and therefore it doesn't then map out when we want to either report on things, or if we want to connect. And I think you showed the map of the client, the contractor, et cetera, how do we map all that together if we're all looking at 19650, but the items are subjective, so we go and build our systems or our processes or teach our people to do certain things that slightly doesn't align with what we've got. Because one of the things in it is CDE, does it mean, can we have one CDE or can we have many? And people are not clear on that. So that's just one example.
Well, that's a really good point, actually, because with the focus of this webinar was on complex projects, and Tom Whiting in his introduction showed those data silos, and we've got client, contractor, design, supply chain, CDEs, and information sits at a state across all of those, and sometimes it's challenging. So Thomas, talk to me about, we'll pick a specific process, information delivery planning, where you have got that world of information existing in different states, and as an information management lead or as a design management lead, how do you go about building trust in the information across those environments? What have McLaren done there?
So information delivery planning. So when it's so we have to, obviously we have to get multiple buy-in from various stakeholders into the process. So the reason why we want to do information delivery planning in the first place is we want to track, the quantum of information that we're getting from any of our subcontractor appointments. So are we getting, so it's asking that question at the outset. If we're pitching that, making sure that we go through the actual tendering process, we need to be asking for an information delivery plan from any potential tenderers, where they will give us an approximation of the quantum of information we're expecting to receive. Before, if we just gave a TIDP to a project QS, because they don't understand why we're asking for it, they'd probably just issue it out and never return it or never chase for it. So we've had to explain to them, go through the, explain to the QS about why we're actually getting it. But in the first place, what's the benefit? It allows you as a project QS, for project QS to receive to help with your commercial valuations as you get to once you appoint a contractor. So once we've got the we get the quantum of information, how do we sort of then develop the trust in the information? So how we obviously we've invested a lot in our internal technology. We understand our technology. We've got our data going into Microsoft Fabric, and then we're surfacing reporting off of the data. So I guess the information, we're quite confident now as a position that when we're reporting against projects, we know which projects are actually following the correct procedure and which ones aren't. So we can, I guess that we've got the trust that we're actually following the correct procedure internally.
Yeah, so a bit of repetition to drive standardized working processes there. Andrea, George, you mentioned a moment ago that you started certain processes on Excel at the start of a major program and evolved those to databases. What were the challenges you were finding, and what is a database approach now delivering for you?
So everybody loves an Excel. We all love an Excel, but it's got its uses. I used to use Excel to do my little things, but on a major projects, it isn't the right tool. And we used Excel to carry out our TIDPs, our document registers, and so on, right at the beginning, and so on. But we quickly found out that it's fine for a few hundred, but when it comes to hundreds of thousands, it isn't the right approach. Maybe we should have that in our mind now. And we're now using database. So we're using Endeavour, which Amodal have developed to capture everything. So we've got our TIDPs, our MIDPs, our information delivery packaging in that. So we've got all that information, which is database, relational database, which means that we have got everything captured. We're not worried about putting a formula in that might crash it out. We're not worried about somebody putting a bit of free text in there that will crash it out, and we're able to output it and report on it as well. So that's one of the major ones that's really made our life much easier, and therefore much more able to collect that data, because we're now fixing the source data, which is really crucial. Because a lot of people just use an output and go and fix the output, whereas we're using the output and then going and fixing the source data, rather than just reporting on bad source data and updated Excel sheets, basically. So to us, that's a real big game changer.
Can I just come in here? So I think there's also like information security pieces around this. So spreadsheet's a spreadsheet. You can do certain amounts of security on them, but once you can get into an actual system, you can make sure that only the right people can see the see what they should see in a system, but also, there's more data validation. We get better quality of data back out. Spreadsheets are great, but if someone deletes some lines by accident or does a fill down in the wrong column, the data's just trashed. Our experience when we moved our TIDPs from Excel and the data was terrible, and now we have it, as Josh said, we've got it in Endeavour. Our quality of data really good now. We can report on it. We can actually make decisions based off it. We couldn't do that from the spreadsheets.
So back to that confidence and trust again. Thank you.
Oh.
Tom Whiting, I'll come to you. I think if when I first met you, and if I cut you in half, it said the words common data environment down the middle, such as your expertise. I met you actually when I worked for a common data environment provider, and I'm acutely aware that the implementation of a CDE may vary right across the industry. Why do you think true adoption and true use of the CDE is still so patchy? They're often just a file storage center, and it's very difficult once you put hundreds of thousands of documents in to actually retrieve at point of need.
Yeah, I think it's probably part of it's back to the standards of what George was discussing earlier. It's open, everything's open to interpretation. There's an element of a tick box. If I need a CDE, set one up. Oh, it needs to align to ISOs, set that up, and it's like, but what value is someone trying to get from it? How are you trying to find information? It was interesting. George and Andrew were talking about their TIDP process. Actually, the value is in them understanding and interpreting the information at the end to get it into packages. I think, yes, there is the ISOs talk about having a TIDP and MIDP process, but for what value? In reality, you see an awful lot of people set placeholders up in the CDE to understand what's going on, and their processes tend to fall over once they've done that, because they actually don't always do it consistently, because they are in a rush. Construction's always a bit late to start. We don't give adequate time to set the right systems up at the right kind of that window at the beginning of setting things up. Would you have ever started in Excel, George, if you knew the scale of it? Well, there wasn't the time or that value. Like, you wouldn't do it knowing those bits and pieces, and we don't always give. We're under time pressure. We need to get going. We need to see benefits straight away, and understanding that change management of once you've done that, there is a pain to go through, and when do you pull that trigger to go through that pain of migrations between systems? We see it more and more, especially we kind of actually do it with McLaren, looking after McLaren property. The design happens in their CDE, and then McLaren Construction might win it, and then we kind of pass the information over, but only the relevant contractual information before it gets handed back at the end. So as an asset owner, the property side of the business has everything stored correctly, but the contractor only has what's relevant to them. And I think we're quite clear on how to find information, what should be standardized and is going to add value for those right people. Surveys tend to be my example of, I want to find all my relevant surveys. Where are they? They're kind of spread across a mishmash of folders in a lot of systems, and it's hard for people to retrieve them. But it's what's important to them, and they spend a lot of time looking for it.
Thomas, can I come to you on that point? So in terms of CDE usage, this may be something back to George about the 20% of information that is created is actually useful. Most of that information, in terms of the originators, is provided by your supply chain. What do you think their perception of a common data environment is, and how do you support their onboarding and make sure they're fully utilising the CDE properly?
Subcontractors probably just see it as a data repository or a holding point where they're expected to upload information to, but it's also, it's a contractual requirement, and maybe that's all they actually really need to certainly see it as long as they're uploading information to the correct seed, publishing it in the right folder, and not sending a WeTransfer or any of the other great FTPs that we all love. As long as the information is coming through the right channels, that should be acceptable, and it's following the right naming protocols. That's probably, and that for a subcontractor, that's perhaps all they need to see. They need to understand, obviously, that that is where they go to access the right information. And I think we discussed this at the start as one of the points about the gaps between information and the willingness. You will issue a subcontractor a pack of information at tender, but those drawings might shift. But they will still work to that tender information. That will still, because they don't have that willingness to go and check on the CDE, because for them it might be too complex. So we get in early with the appointments, and we obviously onboard them onto all of our systems. So whether that's been a subcontractor, you need to use a CDE because that is where the latest information stored is, the 2D outputs, for example, that are coming from other designers that you need to build to. But we also try and help them a bit. We have our field management platform. So we have A-Sites, our CDE, Dalox is out in the field, and we've created an integration between the two. So the latest information that's on A-Site will always get pushed into Dalox. So as a contractor, we do try and help our supply chain as much as possible.
Brilliant, thank you. Just we're heading towards the last few minutes, but I'll ask you to be relatively brief in your response. But the skills gap is widening when we talk about digital and information management. Sometimes digitally fluid talent is difficult to find. What digital skills are most urgently needed in construction today, and where in your organisations, where do you look for those people? Andrew, I'll maybe come to you first on that.
This is a really interesting question. I certainly for my team, they're support teams, but they're supporting a really weird concoction of systems. I tend to recruit for soft skills, and then in my mind, if someone has the intelligence and the want to learn, then we can teach them the technical side. But when we think about what do we need right now, we need AI devs, we need developers, we need data analysts we've got all this data, but what do we do with it? And we've talked about that a lot this morning. And we need people who know how to interpret data. It's all well and good having a great big data lake with all this data in it. But if you don't know what to do with it, and you don't know how it all mixes together and actually what it means, what does the data mean, it's useless to you. So, we need people who really do understand data and can give us that value back out of that data. That's a big skill gap that I think we need to fill at the moment.
Thank you. George, anything to add there?
I think Andrew mentioned transferable skills, and I think that's really good, because if we catch them when they're coming into the industry and we teach them quite a lot of this and focus on structured data, that's a good start. But what we actually need is people with backgrounds in design, system security, system development, that sort of stuff, so we can then home them into the right ways of working. We really focused or have been focusing on BIM and what BIM does, but I think we need to now just move slightly differently, and it's the data and the information and the management of that information.
Thank you, George. Thomas, McLaren, how are you closing the skills gap or uplifting and building people's capabilities in your organisation?
So I don't know if you said it, but it was certainly, in the pre-meeting, it's about digitally fluent talent being hard to attract. I'd push back on that. And I think, construction is an attractive career choice for a lot of people. It's where you are creating the entry points for them. So as an internal example, we created a digital construction apprenticeship, and we specifically aimed it for 18-year-olds, so people, college leavers, because we want to bring them in, and it's the opportunity to create our own talent pipeline and also mold them to work in the McLaren way of working. We were inundated with this one apprenticeship that we put on the government portal, and we had 400 applicants for it. So there is an interest in working in construction. I just don't think there's enough opportunities for the people out there. But if organisations are looking to create and want to invest in their own pipeline, it's where you pitch it. Are you thinking of entry points as university leavers, we looked at university leavers, but actually thought if we can give them a qualification that they can do as part of an apprenticeship with on-the-job training, we thought that was the right target for us as an organisation. It's been proven by the number of applicants we had who've shown an interest.
I have a view, like in the old days of IT, that BIM had a stigma linked to it as well, and those with a BIM title couldn't necessarily connect or converse with those in construction. He says with air quotes, and I hate doing that. How have you overcome that with young people that are coming in or apprentices? Would you see them actually going into sites, into procurement roles, so they get a more rounded view on how information management supports different stakeholders, both internally and outside your organisation?
100%, yeah. So, the idea is that you are coming in as a digital, because we don't, I try to avoid using the word BIM because of perhaps the stigma associated with it in the industry, certainly in a contractor. But the apprenticeship is for someone to come in and learn about construction, to obviously undertake a digital construction and support information management across our project portfolio. But it's also, being out on site and understanding these great assets that we're building across the UK.
Brilliant, thank you. Tom?
I think we're getting worse as an industry. We're not getting better. If I said what is information management, what is BIM, it's so broad of what we're actually covering. There isn't necessarily a specific skill set that we're missing. I think we are basically upskilling people. Ideally, we wouldn't exist because all the different stakeholders would know what to do and how to do it, and they'd all be in that. So the breadth of areas that we're covering is so, like, your technology experts, process experts, upskilling experts are trying to help those others. So I think that's why it works when the soft skills are the most important skills, because you can teach someone to do that, but it's about helping others to get those productivity gains. Sometimes I think the problem is it becomes, if you want BIM and information management, becomes isolated of, oh, you go and ask the BIM person and they do it for you. That's not how it should be. The productivity gains is to get the masses doing it. If you're really good at your job, you wouldn't be doing anything because you would have got everyone else doing that. It's about coaching and taking them on the journey, and that's a certain skill set that should be appreciated and needs to grow. But it is different, that you do need to have the appreciation and understanding of inherently complex issues, and it's only getting more and more complex with databases and things like that. I feel Andrea's about to add something.
Yeah, so I just want to talk about, and we struggled to find apprenticeships within information management. So we went down the trainee route, and we've now had over 20 trainees come in to the information management team, and some of them have spread their wings and gone into other teams on the project. But a lot of them have stayed with us, and it was about actually bringing them in, and helping them to understand what they wanted to do, where their key skills were. Some went into the BIM team, and we don't like saying that, but we do have a BIM team. So some have gone in, some of them have come to the software support team. We've got GIS trainees, and then they sort of graduate to the next level when they've done 12 months of training. That has been really, really successful for us, because we've had a wide range of different talents come in at that point, and we've then been able to work with them to see really where their skill set is. And Tom, you were just saying about how it is broad and there's lots of different things in there. So that's how, again, soft skills, and then let's see what they can do. Let's see what they really enjoy doing, and let's see where they're going to get most value, and they're going to add most value onto the project, which has been really interesting exercise for us.
Yeah, I have a view that's probably in between the speakers about the future talent and where it's going to come from. But one thing at my core I do know, and it's to echo the words of Nima, we are all information managers, and I think if we can increase the discipline, we've got a perfect catalyst at the moment. I'm going to say the two letters AI. Apologies. I certainly didn't want to introduce that too early in this process, but you're kind of right at the core. Information management practice, it will lay the foundations for more ethical, better governed, and better trusted. Whether that's Gen AI, LLMs, whether it's robotic process automation, whatever genre or type or deployment of AI, good information management foundation and practice sits right at the core. We'll wrap today. I'm going to ask you to be as brief as you can, but one question: if you could fix one information management challenge tomorrow that would transform productivity, what would it be? Thomas, I'll come to you first.
To stick with the theme, it's the willingness to engage from all participants on the project. That would be the one. Maybe it's the culture of construction in general.
And would you have a silver bullet for that, or any hints of how you'd go about that?
I mean, I can only use the experience of working within McLaren and what has worked, and the focus that we've put into getting buy-in from the leadership within McLaren as an organisation, and how we've not just deployed technology, and there's nothing in the background to support that. There's been workshops with various leaders across the organisation that we did, and the process that we've refined over various vendor partnerships and vendor sort of engagement processes, where we're actually getting much better at working with vendors that are willing to that fit with McLaren as an organisation.
Thank you. George, same question to you, then Andrea.
Right, so I think I mentioned it earlier on, fix source data, not the outputs. People still want to fix outputs, not the source data. And working with our people, or process people, systems, people in particular, to teach them this, and not to actually think it's okay to go and fix the output rather than the source data.
Andrew, would you develop that any further?
No, well, I mean, for my suggestion is, I think that we do, and we've talked about this, we need better recognition for information management, and for people to understand the importance. And my silver bullet for that is to really start to think about, where does it lie in your organisation? Where does information management sit? And do people understand what it is right at exec level to be able to give that push? Because ultimately we can't deliver any projects without the data. We can dig holes, we can pour concrete, we can build things, but it's not finished until we deliver the data. And that is still lost.
Yeah. Tom and I met with a tier one contractor very recently, and they didn't have a home for information management as a capability lead. Specifically, there was design, procurement, so on and so forth, commercial, but nothing to specifically call out IM. Tom, we'll wrap up with you on that same silver bullet, magic wand. What have you got?
Clarity on return on investment. So I think part of the problems that we've discussed is because it's really hard to understand the value of good information management, because it's like, if you did it better, then that problem wouldn't have happened. But if you do it well from the beginning and invest, because effectively the earlier you invest in better information management, the better things are set up, the less problems you might face. But it's understanding when to start, when to do that, and the value that will derive. Because if a project run perfectly smoothly and everyone can find everything, you've got all those productivity, what are you benchmarking against? So it's really hard to understand the value and to encourage people to spend early in that, to mitigate the risks of poor information management. The amount of time that's wasted in the industry, I think it's like 22% of each person's time is looking for information, and you're at a 3% margin, and you're kind of going, okay, there's quite a big gain there. So trying to actually put that into metrics that people can understand, and which I think would lead to understanding the value of good information management off the back of that, and attract people to it.
Brilliant. Well, we are almost at the hour. All it leaves me to say is thank you so much to Andrea, George, Tom, for joining us today and for sharing your insights, both personal opinions, but also organizational perspectives as well. Invaluable there. Yeah, my view in terms of is there a magic wand, silver bullet? No, probably not. But it's making sure you can clearly communicate the why to every individual, and also to the organization, because otherwise people will find a reason not to change if they can't personally connect to the why. We do welcome feedback from today's session. We'll communicate out to each of you following today's webinar. If there are any other specific questions that you've got for the panel that we haven't got to today, please ask us those. We'll be running more of these focused webinars over the forthcoming weeks and months. So again, anybody got any passion topics that they would like to raise, do give us that on your feedback as well. I'll end it there. Thank you once again. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.